My own brother swung a 50-pound solid brass stanchion directly into my knee just because I told his billionaire fiancée a tiny little secret. He already had a wife. As my bone gave way with a sickening crack, and I collapsed onto the polished marble floor, my mother did not scream for help. She did not call for an ambulance. She clapped. She actually clapped her hands together, laughed out loud in a room full of country club elites, and told me it was about time someone put the family trash in its place. They thought they had finally broken me for good. They had no idea my smartwatch was already recording the absolute destruction of their entire world. If you have ever been the scapegoat in your own family, tell me where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe, because you will want to hear exactly how I made them pay. The Kensington Country Club was suffocatingly elegant. Waiters in crisp white tuxedos glided past towering floral arrangements offering vintage champagne to Seattle's oldest money. Tonight was the official engagement party for my older brother Andre and his golden ticket, Caroline Kensington. Andre was playing his role perfectly. He wore a custom-tailored suit, flashing his perfect smile, mingling with venture capitalists, and pretending he was a wildly successful tech CEO. He was the absolute pride and joy of my mother Yvonne, the handsome, charismatic Morehouse graduate who was finally elevating our family status to the elite level she always craved. I was just Tessa, the 31-year-old forensic accountant who wore off-the-rack blazers, kept her head down, and supposedly brought nothing to the family legacy. I walked right past the massive swan ice sculpture and marched straight up to the head table where Caroline was laughing with her father. Mr. Kensington was a ruthless man who could destroy a business with a single phone call, but right now he was beaming at his future son-in-law. I did not raise my voice. I did not make a dramatic scene. I simply reached into my leather portfolio, pulled out a certified stamped legal document, and placed it directly onto Caroline's gold-rimmed dinner plate. Caroline stopped laughing immediately. She picked up the thick paper, her perfectly manicured fingers tracing the raised state seal. She asked what this was, her voice dropping to a confused whisper. I kept my eyes locked on Andre, whose charming smile was rapidly sliding off his face, replaced by a mask of pure panic. I told her it was a marriage certificate from Fulton County, Georgia. I spoke clearly, making sure Mr. Kensington could hear every single syllable. I figured you should probably know that the man you are marrying next month is still legally married to a woman named Renee, I told her. I explained that she lives across town, and he has been quietly using her life savings to fund his half of this extravagant wedding. The silence that hit the room was absolute and deafening. The string quartet in the corner seemed to abruptly stop playing mid-note. Caroline gasped, her hand flying to her mouth as the color drained completely from her face. Mr. Kensington snatched the paper from her hands, his sharp eyes scanning the legal text. Andre did not try to explain. He did not try to deny it. The mask of the polished, wealthy entrepreneur shattered instantly, revealing the desperate, cornered fraud he truly was. His eyes locked onto me with a level of pure, unadulterated hatred I had never seen before. He screamed that I was a lying, miserable witch, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings of the ballroom. Before anyone could process his outburst, Andre lunged toward the VIP entrance. He grabbed one of the heavy, solid brass stanchions holding the red velvet ropes. He hoisted it with both hands like a baseball bat and charged at me. I tried to step back, but my heel caught on the edge of the thick dining room rug. The heavy brass base slammed directly into my right knee. The sound was horrifying. A loud, wet snap that echoed through the stunned silence of the room. A shockwave of pure, blinding agony shot up my thigh and down to my ankle. My leg gave out completely, and I crashed hard onto the rigid marble floor. I could not breathe. I could not speak. The pain was a living, breathing fire consuming my entire lower body. I curled into myself, clutching my shattered leg as the surrounding guests erupted into chaos and screams. But the most horrifying part of the night was not my brother fracturing my knee. It was the sound of my mother's heels clicking rapidly across the marble toward me. Yvonne did not run to shield me from another blow. She did not drop to the floor to hold my hand or scream for a doctor. She stood right over me, looking down at my agonizing state, and let out a sharp, highly satisfied laugh. "Look at what you did to yourself." Yvonne spat, her voice dripping with absolute disgust. She told me I just could not stand to see my brother succeed. She said I had always been jealous. Jealous that he got into Morehouse while I settled for a cheap community college. Jealous that he is building an empire while I sit in a tiny cubicle crunching numbers like a nobody. She yelled that I never contributed a single dime of the black tax to elevate this family, and now I wanted to ruin his chance to secure our financial future. Finally, she announced to the room someone put the trash in its place. I lay there on the cold floor, gasping for air through the blinding waves of pain. My own mother was justifying my brutal assault in front of 100 wealthy strangers protecting her golden child, while her daughter bled on the ground. Mr. Kensington was shouting furiously for his private security team. Caroline was sobbing hysterically into her napkin. Andre was breathing heavily, still holding the brass pole, looking at me like I was a pest he had finally squashed. They all thought I was defeated. They thought my silence was submission to the pain and their power. They were completely wrong. I forced my eyes open, looking past the blood pooling near my calf. I looked straight up into Yvonne's sneering face. I did not cry. I forced the corners of my mouth to turn up into a cold, hard smile. Slowly, deliberately, I reached up with a trembling hand and tapped the face of my smartwatch. The recording of the entire conversation, the loud, sickening crack of the brass pole, Andre violent rage, and Yvonne horrific, abusive admission had just finished syncing directly to my secure cloud server. The evidence was locked, sealed, and ready to be weaponized. My knee was broken, but my mind was sharper than ever. I could already see the headlines. I could already see the police reports being typed up. My mother thought she was securing her retirement by marrying her son into old money, but all she had done was hand me the exact leverage I needed to destroy them both. As the distant sound of police sirens began to wail outside the country club, I knew the physical pain was temporary. The revenge I was about to unleash on them would last a lifetime. The harsh fluorescent lights of the emergency room seared through my eyelids before I even fully regained consciousness. The pain in my right leg was a living, breathing entity. It pulsed with a fiery intensity that made my stomach churn with every heartbeat. I tried to shift my weight, but a heavy, rigid brace locked my entire lower body in place, pinning me to the mattress. Dr. Evans stood at the foot of my bed, holding an X-ray film against the harsh white light panel. He did not sugarcoat the reality of my situation. My patella was completely shattered into jagged fragments. He explained that I would need multiple reconstructive surgeries just to bear weight again. Even with months of intense physical therapy, he warned that I would likely walk with a permanent limp for the rest of my life. A permanent limp. The words echoed relentlessly in the sterile room. My own brother had crippled me simply because I dared to tell the truth to his wealthy fiancée. As the doctor adjusted my pain medication drip and stepped out to finalize my admission paperwork, I stared blindly at the ceiling. I was bracing myself for the police to arrive to take my official statement. I had my smartwatch secured tightly on my left wrist, with the audio recording of the entire assault safely uploaded to my secure cloud server. I was ready to press charges and watch his fake empire burn. But the heavy wooden door to my hospital room did not open for law enforcement. It swung wide open to reveal Yvonne and Andre. They marched in looking like they had just stepped off the cover of a luxury lifestyle magazine. Andre was still wearing his custom-tailored Italian suit from the engagement party, without a single drop of my blood on his pristine white shirt. My mother wore her designer pearls and a sharp navy dress, her face locked in a mask of cold, furious determination. There were no balloons in their hands. There were no tearful apologies or frantic questions about my recovery. There was not even a sliver of maternal concern for the daughter lying broken in a hospital bed. Andre marched straight to the side of my bed, ignoring the massive brace encasing my shattered leg. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a thick stack of stapled legal documents, and tossed them directly onto my chest. It was a non-disclosure agreement. A comprehensive gag order written up by whatever expensive crisis management lawyer the Kensington family likely had on retainer. Yvonne stepped forward, her heavy, expensive perfume masking the sharp smell of antiseptic. "Sign it," she hissed, her voice vibrating with a vicious intensity that demanded absolute obedience. "Sign the paper, Tessa, and tell the police you tripped over your own clumsy feet and fell down a flight of stairs." I stared at the thick legal document lying on my hospital gown and let out a dry, humorless laugh. "You want me to lie to the police after he shattered my leg in front of 100 witnesses?" I asked, my voice raspy but remarkably steady. Yvonne leaned aggressively over the bed guardrail, her eyes flashing with pure, unrestrained rage. "The Kensingtons are old money white folks, Tessa." She spat, the words landing like venom. "They belong to a world we have spent decades trying to enter. They demand perfection, and they will not accept a son-in-law with an aggravated assault charge. They will cancel the wedding instantly, and this family will lose everything we have worked for." I gripped the stiff edge of the hospital bedsheets. "You mean Andre will lose his golden meal ticket?" I shot back, refusing to back down. My mother slammed her palm violently against the metal bed frame, causing my injured leg to throb. "You have never paid your share of the black tax to this family," she shouted, her voice rising to a frantic pitch. "You chose to go to some cheap community college instead of an elite historic university. You hoard your little accounting salary in a tiny apartment while your brother is out here risking everything to build an empire. You never bought me a car. You never funded your brother when his startups needed seed money. You never uplifted this family the way a successful black woman is expected to do. Since you selfishly refuse to contribute financially, you owe us this sacrifice. You will sign that paper, or you will be entirely dead to me." She was weaponizing our culture, twisting the very real concept of family obligation to cover up a violent, unprovoked crime. She wanted me to pay my family dues with my own physical safety and permanent disability. I looked at the woman who gave birth to me, feeling the absolute last remaining thread of daughterly affection snap completely and permanently. I picked up the non-disclosure agreement, my fingers gripping the thick, expensive paper. "I am not signing a single page of this," I said with deadly calm. "I am pressing charges today. The police are going to see exactly what kind of violent monster you raised, and the Kensingtons are going to watch your precious golden child go straight to federal prison." I expected Andre to explode into another violent rage. I expected him to yell or grab the metal bed frame or try to intimidate me physically right there in the ward. He did none of those things. Instead, Andre calmly adjusted his silk tie and smoothed the lapels of his jacket. He leaned in terrifyingly close to my face, close enough that I could smell the expensive scotch on his breath. "You are going to sign it, Tessa," Andre whispered, a sinister, knowing smile spreading across his handsome face. "Because if you open your mouth to the cops, you will be the one living on the streets." I frowned, a sharp wave of confusion cutting through my physical pain. "You cannot threaten me, Andre," I stated flatly. "I make my own money, and my firm values my work. I am completely independent from your chaos." Andre chuckled softly, a dark sound that made my blood run absolutely cold. "You think you are independent," he said, leaning closer. 2 years ago, I needed serious capital to keep up appearances and fund my tech company lifestyle. But my credit was garbage, so I took out a $2 million commercial business loan. I used your social security number, your pristine credit score, and your forged signature to secure the entire fund. My heart stopped beating in my chest. The breath vanished from my lungs. As a forensic financial investigator, I knew exactly what those words meant. Andre stepped back, looking down at my braced leg with absolute, undisputed triumph. "If I go to jail, the fake company collapses completely," he stated, his voice dripping with malice. "The loan defaults tomorrow morning. You will be sitting in a wheelchair with $2 million in fraudulent debt strapped to your name. Your prestigious accounting firm will fire you the exact second your credit gets flagged for massive commercial default. You will be crippled, bankrupt, and unemployed before the weekend is over." So, sister, are you going to sign the paper or are you going to lose everything you have ever worked for? The sterile smell of the hospital followed me out the sliding glass doors, but it was the heavy, suffocating weight of Andre's threat that truly paralyzed me. $2 million. He had stolen my social security number, forged my signature on federal documents, and chained my entire financial future to his sinking ship. Every single step to my car was a jagged bolt of agony shooting up from my shattered knee, the rigid medical brace cutting sharply into my bruised skin. But the intense physical pain was just a distant background noise compared to the cold, calculating fury crystallizing in my mind. My own mother and brother thought they had permanently trapped me. They genuinely believed that the threat of utter financial ruin and severe physical trauma would buy my absolute silence, so Andre could safely marry Caroline Kensington and access her old money billions. I hoisted myself painfully into the driver's seat of my sedan, throwing my heavy metal crutches into the back seat with a loud clatter. I was not going to the police station. Not yet. A simple assault charge was far too good for my brother. I was going to systematically dismantle his entire life, brick by stolen brick. And I knew exactly which brick I needed to pull out first. I drove across the city far away from the manicured green lawns and exclusive gated driveways of the Kensington Country Club. I eventually pulled into the cracked, weed-choked parking lot of the Sunridge Apartments. This was exactly where the golden boy hid his dirty little secret from the world. I dragged myself out of the car, gripping the metal crutches until my knuckles turned completely white from the strain. It took me 10 agonizing minutes to climb the single flight of steep concrete stairs leading to apartment 2B. I leaned heavily against the peeling white paint of the doorframe and knocked 3 times. The door jerked open almost immediately. Renee stood there, her eyes bloodshot and swollen, wearing faded blue medical scrubs. The deep exhaustion radiating from her posture was palpable. For a split second, she looked deeply confused by my rigid leg brace and the medical crutches. Then the recognition set in, and her confusion twisted into pure, unfiltered hostility. She tried to slam the heavy door right in my face. I shoved the rubber tip of my crutch firmly into the door jamb, stopping it from closing. Renee shoved back her voice, dropping into a venomous hiss, so the nosy neighbors would not hear the commotion. "What are you doing here, Tessa?" she demanded, her hands trembling violently as she gripped the edge of the cheap wood. "Did your precious mother send you to drop off another pathetic lie? Because I am done. I am completely done covering for him." I stared at her, seeing the absolute desperation etched into the dark, heavy circles under her eyes. "Renee," I said evenly, breathing through a fresh wave of blinding pain radiating from my knee. "I am not here for them. I am here to show you the truth." Renee let out a harsh, bitter laugh that sounded exactly like breaking glass. The truth, she mocked, stepping back just enough for me to limp painfully inside the cramped, dimly lit living room. She slammed the door shut behind me and whirled around. "Your mother stood right exactly where you are standing 3 months ago." She looked me dead in the eye and told me Andre was deployed in Dubai on a highly classified government contract. She told me the military was withholding his pay for security reasons. "You all sat back and let him drain my entire retirement fund just to keep this roof over my head while he was supposedly serving our country." I balanced my weight carefully on my good leg and unzipped my leather portfolio. Renee was shaking now, her fierce anger masking a deep, profound grief. She told me how she had worked double shifts at the city hospital for 6 grueling years to build that retirement fund. How Andre had expertly manipulated her to liquidate it to save a fictional overseas business venture because his military pay was magically frozen. "You think you are the only one he destroyed?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet and flat. I pulled out a thick stack of printed financial forensic traces. "My brother is not in Dubai, Renee. He has never been in Dubai. Last night, he shattered my knee with a solid brass stanchion because I told his new wealthy fiancée that he was still legally married to you." Renee froze instantly. The anger drained rapidly out of her face, leaving behind a hollow, devastating shock. Fiancée, she whispered the word, barely making it past her trembling lips. I placed the highlighted bank statements directly onto her scratched wooden coffee table. I am a financial investigator, I told her, staring into her wide eyes. I track hidden money for a living. I tracked yours. I pointed to the specific highlighted transfers, showing money moving rapidly from her retirement account, filtering cleanly through 3 dummy shell companies, and landing directly in the velvet-lined register of a high-end Seattle jeweler. He took your 6 years of double shifts, Renee. He took your future. And he used it to buy Caroline Kensington an $80,000 custom engagement ring. Renee sank slowly onto the worn fabric of her sofa. She picked up the bank statements, her eyes scanning the highlighted numbers over and over again. I watched the remaining warmth leave her eyes, replaced entirely by a terrifying glacial clarity. She did not cry. She did not scream. She looked up at me, and I saw a perfect reflection of my own cold, calculated fury. He bought another woman a diamond with the money I explicitly saved for our future children, she stated, her voice totally devoid of any human emotion. I nodded, adjusting my grip on the uncomfortable crutches. He also took out a $2 million fraudulent loan using my social security number, I added grimly. If we do not burn his life to the ground by next week, I go completely bankrupt and you end up living in your car. We are the acceptable collateral damage of his social climbing. It is time we become the explosion. Renee slowly placed the papers back on the table. She looked at my shattered knee, then looked at the portfolio in my hands. What do we do? She asked, the alliance permanently forged in that single unbreakable moment. I opened my mouth to outline the first step of our retaliation, when a massive, heavy pounding physically shook the front door. The knocks were frantic, violent, and entirely uninvited. We both jumped at the sudden noise. Renee crept silently toward the peephole and looked through. Her posture instantly went completely rigid. She turned back to me, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and absolute hatred. "It is Yvonne," she whispered. The heavy pounding on the door echoed through the small apartment like a physical blow. It was not a polite knock. It was the demanding, entitled pounding of someone who expected the world to instantly yield to their presence. Renee and I locked eyes, the air between us suddenly freezing. Panic flared in her exhausted features. If my mother saw me here sitting at the coffee table with Andre's secret wife and a massive stack of financial forensics, my entire leverage would vanish in an instant. Yvonne would know we were actively building a case against her golden child. I had to disappear immediately. I grabbed the heavy metal crutches and hoisted myself up, biting the inside of my cheek until I tasted sharp copper to keep from screaming out loud. The rigid medical brace locked my shattered knee in place, making every single movement a clumsy, agonizing drag. The pain was blinding, a hot fire racing up my thigh, but the adrenaline pumping through my veins pushed me forward. "Move," Renee mouthed, silently pointing frantically toward the short, narrow hallway. I hobbled as fast as my broken body would allow, dragging my injured leg across the cheap, scuffed linoleum floor and slipping into the cramped, windowless bedroom. I left the hollow wooden door cracked just an inch, plunging myself into the deep darkness of the room while keeping a clear, direct line of sight to the apartment entryway. The pounding started again, louder and more violent this time, accompanied by Yvonne's shrill, demanding voice yelling for Renee to open up before she called the building manager to force her way inside. Renee took a deep, shuddering breath. She smoothed down her faded blue medical scrubs, wiped the residual shock from her face, and expertly transformed her expression into a mask of weary, defeated submission. She unlocked the deadbolt, turned the brass knob, and pulled the door open. Yvonne did not wait to be invited inside. She pushed past Renee with the kind of aggressive, ruthless entitlement reserved for people who truly believed they owned the world and everyone existing in it. My mother stood in the center of the cramped living room, her expensive cream-colored designer coat looking entirely and ridiculously out of place against the backdrop of water-damaged ceilings and thrift store furniture. She dramatically wrinkled her nose, looking around the small apartment, as if the very air inside was contaminating her lungs, radiating an aura of absolute disgust. But she did not come alone. A tall, impeccably dressed man stepped into the apartment right behind her. He wore a sharp, custom-tailored charcoal gray suit and carried a sleek, hard-shelled leather briefcase. His expression was completely blank professional and entirely devoid of empathy, like a predator patiently waiting for a command from its handler. He quietly closed the apartment door behind him, effectively trapping Renee inside the living room with them. From my hiding spot in the dark bedroom, I squinted through the narrow crack in the door, trying to get a better look at the man-face. The poor lighting in the hallway cast a heavy, obscuring shadow over his features, but something about his rigid posture, the arrogant tilt of his chin, sent a sudden icy shiver crawling straight down my spine. Yvonne turned her piercing, judgmental gaze directly onto Renee. She did not bother with false pleasantries or fake sympathy. She unclasped the gold hardware of her designer handbag, reached inside, and pulled out two thick, tightly banded stacks of $100 bills. She tossed them carelessly onto the scratched wooden coffee table with a heavy, insulting thud. They landed exactly in the same spot where Andre Damning highlighted bank statements had been sitting just moments before. $10,000, Yvonne announced, her voice dripping with sheer, unadulterated condescension. $10,000 in untraceable, cold, hard cash. That is more money than a girl from your background makes in an entire year changing bedpans at the city clinic. The tall man in the charcoal suit stepped forward, silently opening his leather briefcase with a crisp, metallic click. He pulled out a thick blue legal folder and an expensive silver fountain pen, placing them precisely on the table next to the stacks of cash. Renee stared at the money, then looked up at my mother, her acting skills kicking in flawlessly. "What is this?" Renee asked, her voice deliberately shaking, playing the part of the intimidated, confused, and broken wife perfectly. Yvonne let out a sharp, breathless laugh, shaking her head slowly, as if she were dealing with a remarkably slow child. "It is your severance package," she sneered, pointing a manicured finger at the blue folder. "You are going to sign these divorce papers right now. And you are going to sign them with a date from exactly 18 months ago. We need the official county records to show that my son has been legally single for over a year." Renee crossed her arms tightly over her chest, stepping back from the coffee table as if the documents were toxic. "You want me to backdate a legal divorce decree so your lying son can marry some rich white girl next month without committing felony bigamy?" Renee stated, keeping her tone perfectly guarded and hesitant. "You want me to just erase our entire legal marriage like it never even happened?" Yvonne took a threatening step closer to Renee, her eyes flashing with a ruthless, predatory gleam that I knew all too well. "Let us be very clear about how the world actually works," Yvonne hissed, dropping all remaining pretense of civility. "My son is marrying into a completely different class now. He is entering an elite world of billionaires, venture capitalists, and generational wealth. He is finally elevating this family and leaving this pathetic, struggling life in the dust. You were nothing but a temporary distraction, a stupid mistake he made when he was young and foolish. Take the cash, ghetto trash. Sign the papers and walk away quietly right now. If you refuse, my lawyer here will tie you up in civil court until you are drowning in so much legal debt you will be living on the street. The Kensingtons will never accept a woman like you, and I will personally completely destroy your life if you try to stand in the way of my family ultimate elevation." In the bedroom, my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird trying to break free. My mother's cruelty was absolute and terrifying. She was perfectly willing to crush an innocent, hard-working woman into dust just to secure a wealthy daughter-in-law and elevate her own social status. But it was not Yvonne's vicious, degrading monologue that made my breath catch in my throat. As my mother threatened Renee with total financial ruin, the silent man in the charcoal suit stepped fully into the harsh light of the living room lamp to tap the silver fountain pen aggressively against the signature line of the forged divorce decree. The illumination hit his face perfectly, and my entire world instantly stopped spinning. I knew that face. I recognized the slicked-back dark hair, the sharp, angular jawline, and the cold, dead shark-like eyes. I gripped the wooden doorframe of the bedroom so hard my fingernails nearly dug through the white paint. My mind flashed back exactly 5 years, transporting me straight to the stuffy, overly air-conditioned wood-paneled office of a downtown probate court. He was the exact same attorney. The very same shady, smooth-talking lawyer who had managed my beloved Big Mama estate after she tragically passed away. The man who sat across from me with a fake, sympathetic smile and handed me the finalized documents claiming my grandmother had left me absolutely nothing. I held my breath in the suffocating darkness of the bedroom. The air grew thick and heavy as I watched the man who stole my grandmother's legacy casually uncap his expensive silver pen. Charles Vance. The name burned like acid in my mind. He was the architect of my family financial abuse, the man who had looked a grieving 18-year-old girl in the eye 5 years ago and smoothly lied, telling me Big Mama left her historic house entirely to Andre. Renee played her part beautifully in the living room. She refused to sign the backdated divorce papers on the spot, citing a fake panic attack and demanding 24 hours to review the complex legal documents. Yvonne scoffed loudly, throwing the stack of cash on the scratched table as a down payment on her silence, and stormed out of the apartment with Vance trailing behind her like a well-paid shadow. The moment the deadbolt clicked shut, I stepped out of the bedroom. Renee and I did not need to exchange a single word. We both knew the war had officially escalated. The drive back to my apartment was a blur of adrenaline and throbbing physical agony. Every time I hit the brakes of my modest sedan, the rigid medical brace dug viciously into my bruised thigh, but I welcomed the sharp spikes of pain. It kept my mind razor sharp. It fueled the cold fire burning in my chest. I limped into my quiet apartment, dropping my heavy metal crutches onto the hardwood floor with a loud clatter, and slid directly into the ergonomic chair at my workstation. This was my domain. I was a senior forensic financial investigator. I spent my days untangling offshore tax havens for multinational corporations and exposing corporate fraudsters who thought they were invisible. My mother and my brother honestly believed they could outsmart me with rudimentary bank fraud. They had no idea they had just handed a loaded weapon to an expert marksman. I cracked my knuckles and opened my encrypted tracing software. I started with Charles Vance. Pulling public state registry records, I began cross-referencing his shady law firm with Andre newly registered limited liability companies. It took me less than 40 minutes to completely shatter the illusion of Andre's brilliant tech career. There was no crypto startup. There was no revolutionary algorithm changing the digital landscape. There were just 3 hollow shell companies, all registered by Vance, constantly shuffling the exact same pool of money back and forth between accounts to create the fake illusion of massive monthly revenue. But that pool of money was steadily shrinking, drained rapidly by Andre luxury car leases, his custom-tailored Italian suits, and his expensive country club memberships. Which brought me to the $10,000 in crisp hundreds currently sitting on Renee's coffee table. My mother had not held a paying job since I was in middle school. She lived entirely off a small pension and the social status she desperately tried to project. So where did a woman with fixed minimal assets get $10,000 in untraceable cash on a random Tuesday afternoon? I logged into a shadow terminal, routing my IP address through a secure proxy, and pulled the digital routing numbers from an old electronic wire transfer Yvonne had sent me years ago. I bypassed her rudimentary personal banking passwords in seconds. Her master password was literally Andre birth year, followed by the word king. The utter arrogant predictability of it made me sick to my stomach. As the transaction ledgers rapidly populated across my dual monitors, the columns of numbers painted a horrifying picture. I muttered to myself in the quiet glow of the screens as I followed the digital breadcrumbs. $50,000 transferred in March, $80,000 in July, another $40,000 just last week. The source account did not belong to my mother's personal savings. It belonged to the First Baptist Church. Yvonne was the head treasurer for the community congregation, a position of ultimate trust she had held for a decade. She had completely unfettered, unmonitored access to the parish accounts. I clicked on the specific origin folder and felt a sudden wave of pure nausea wash over me. It was the Senior Citizen Building Fund. Decades of humble donations, weekend bake sale money, and weekly tithes from elderly community members who implicitly trusted my mother with their life savings. My mother was systematically embezzling from the church's vulnerable elderly population to fund her golden child fake billionaire lifestyle. She was weaponizing the concept of the black tax against me, claiming I owed the family my silence while she was actively stealing from the actual elders of our community. She was filtering the stolen church donations through Charles Vance's fake vendor accounts, washing the money clean and dropping it directly into Andre Crypto's startup balance. The spectacular engagement ring, the massive down payment on the Kensington Country Club for the rehearsal dinner, the $10,000 cash bribe sitting on Renee's table. All of it was stolen from the faithful congregation Yvonne smiled at every single Sunday morning. My mother was not just a social climbing snob. She was a federal criminal. And my brother was her willing, greedy accomplice. They were operating a massive coordinated fraud right under the community nose, and they were using my social security number to take out massive commercial loans to cover the gaps when the stolen church money was not enough to maintain the illusion for Caroline Kensington. I leaned back in my chair, the blue light of the monitors reflecting off my face in the dark room. The sheer scale of their arrogance was breathtaking. They truly believed they were untouchable. They thought they could crush my knee into pieces, buy off a secret wife, forge my signature on a $2 million loan, and walk away perfectly clean into the Kensington family billions. I began compiling every single wire transfer, every fraudulent LLC registration, every forged signature into a massive, heavily encrypted digital dossier. I was building a concrete cage they would never, ever escape from. I was going to bury them in their own greed. Just as I dragged the final PDF showing the drained senior citizen fund into my secure master folder, a loud, sharp chime echoed through the silent apartment. A calendar notification popped up in the top right corner of my laptop screen. I stared at the bold white letters, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across my face. Next month was the First Baptist Church mandated biannual financial audit, and my forensic accounting firm was the exact agency contracted to run the investigation. The revelation about the church audit sat on my computer screen like a ticking time bomb. The sheer poetic justice of it was almost too perfect. My mother had unknowingly handed her financial execution over to the very daughter she was actively trying to destroy. But the audit was weeks away, and Andre was still holding the threat of that $2 million fraudulent loan directly over my head. I knew that if I wanted to completely dismantle their operation without getting caught in the crossfire, I needed to buy myself time. They needed to believe they had completely broken me. They needed to drop their guard and focus entirely on the upcoming Kensington wedding, assuming I was effectively neutralized. I closed the church financial files and opened my encrypted audio recording software. I took a deep breath, letting the intense physical throbbing of my shattered knee wash over my senses. I allowed the genuine pain to well up in my throat, restricting my airway and making my eyes water. I needed to sound utterly defeated. I needed to sound like the pathetic, frightened girl they had always treated me as. With my hands shaking deliberately, I picked up my phone and dialed my mother number. It rang 3 times before she answered, her voice sharp and impatient, as if my mere existence was interrupting something vastly more important. "Mom?" I whispered, letting my voice crack and splinter on the single syllable. I forced a wet, desperate sob into the receiver. "Please, you have to tell Andre to back down. I cannot handle this anymore. I am so scared of the debt. I will lose my job. I will lose everything." The heavy silence on the other end of the line was incredibly thick. I could practically hear the triumphant smile spreading across her face. I kept my eyes locked on my computer monitor, watching the green audio waveforms spike and dip, recording every single agonizing second of my performance. There was a long, cruel pause before Yvonne finally spoke. Her voice was not laced with maternal concern or relief. It was dripping with a toxic, gloating satisfaction. "I knew you would break, Tessa." She laughed, the sound harsh and utterly devoid of empathy. "You have always been weak when pushed. You talk a big game about your little accounting career and your independence, but at the end of the day, you know exactly who holds the power in this family." I sniffled loudly, burying my face in my hand while keeping my eyes absolutely cold and dead on the glowing screen. "I am sorry," I choked out, forcing the words past my teeth. "I will sign the non-disclosure agreement. Just please do not let him destroy my credit. I will do whatever you want." Yvonne let out another victorious sigh. "Of course you will," she stated, her tone confirming that she expected nothing less than my total submission. "This is exactly how it is supposed to be, Tessa. Just like when I made you pay Andre rent for 2 entire years while he was finding himself. A woman's job is to lift her brother up. It is your fundamental duty to sacrifice for the men in your family. You exist to be a stepping stone for him, and the sooner you accept your proper place, the easier your life will be." I watched the recording software capture her confession of financial coercion, preserving her vicious worldview in high-definition digital audio. "Yes, Mom," I whimpered, keeping the act flawlessly intact. "What do you need me to do?" Her tone immediately shifted from gloating victor to commanding general. "You are going to attend the rehearsal dinner this weekend at the Kensington Country Club," she ordered. "You will wear a long conservative dress to hide that ugly medical brace. You will smile and you will mingle with Caroline parents. If anyone asks why you are limping, you will tell them you tripped over your own clumsy feet carrying groceries up the stairs. You will tell them what a wonderful, supportive brother Andre is, and how thrilled you are that he is marrying into such a prestigious family. Do you understand me, Tessa? One wrong word to the Kensingtons, and Andre triggers the loan default." "I understand," I cried, forcing one last pathetic sob into the phone. "I will be perfect. I promise I will not ruin anything." "See that you do," Yvonne snapped before hanging up without another word. The line went dead. I slowly lowered the phone from my ear. The trembling in my hands vanished instantly. The fake tears dried on my cheeks. I reached forward and clicked save on the audio file, locking it behind 2 layers of biometric encryption on my secure server. I had just handed them a false sense of absolute security. They thought they had backed me into a corner, forcing me to play the clumsy, supportive sister at their elite social gathering. They had no idea I was planning to walk into that rehearsal dinner carrying the match that would burn their entire house of cards to the ground. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, letting the silence of my apartment settle around me. The pieces were finally coming together. I had Renee ready to testify about the stolen retirement funds and the fake divorce. I had the digital trail proving my mother was embezzling from the Senior Citizen Building Fund. I had the audio of Yvonne admitting to coercion and financial abuse. I just needed one more piece of leverage to ensure Andre's fake tech company collapsed publicly and spectacularly before the wedding day. As if the universe was actively answering my thoughts, a loud, sharp chime echoed from my work laptop. A high-priority email notification flashed across the screen, branded with the bright red urgent banner, reserved only for top-tier clients. I rolled my chair closer, ignoring the sharp ache in my braced leg, and clicked open the message from the managing partner of my forensic accounting firm. The email outlined a massive newly signed contract for an expedited deep dive due diligence risk assessment. The client was demanding a complete and total financial teardown of a local tech startup before finalizing a multi-million-dollar investment package. They wanted offshore account traces, liability exposure reports, and a full background check on the founder. I scanned down to the target company name and smiled a dark, predatory smile. It was Andre Fake Crypto Startup. My eyes drifted down to the bottom of the email to see who was paying my firm an exorbitant emergency fee to rip my brother company apart. The client's signature line was stamped at the bottom in bold black letters. The man demanding the forensic audit was Arthur Kensington, Caroline father. Arthur Kensington wanted a complete financial teardown. I stared at his bold signature at the bottom of the email, feeling a profound sense of poetic justice wash over me. My firm was highly respected across the country for uncovering corporate fraud, and Mr. Kensington was a ruthless, brilliant businessman who clearly did not trust his future son-in-law. I immediately replied to the managing partner requesting to take the lead role on this specific due diligence risk assessment. I cited my extensive background in tracing localized offshore accounts and my familiarity with the regional tech sector. Within 10 minutes, the partner approved my request and transferred the complete client file to my secure inbox. I poured myself a cup of black coffee, ignoring the sharp throbbing pain in my braced leg, and locked the heavy deadbolt on my apartment door. I booted up my encrypted forensic software and linked my terminal directly to the firm's secure database. I was no longer just a betrayed sister seeking revenge against a toxic family. I was a senior financial investigator officially contracted by a billionaire to gut Andre's fake empire. I started by pulling the preliminary investment packet Andre had confidently submitted to the Kensington family. It was an absolute masterpiece of corporate deception. He had presented them with glossy prospectus reports, projecting massive quarterly returns from his revolutionary crypto startup. He included fake user acquisition metrics and fabricated revenue streams. But I knew exactly where to look for the structural cracks in his foundation. I spent the next 14 hours immersed in a digital labyrinth of wire transfers, shell registrations, and offshore accounts. I cracked passwords and bypassed rudimentary security firewalls, muttering to myself in the dark apartment as the horrifying truth unfolded across my dual monitors. I tracked every single penny moving through Charles Vance's shady law firm. I documented the 3 hollow shell companies Andre used to create the illusion of generating actual revenue. I took detailed high-resolution screenshots of the internal ledgers, proving that the money circulating through these accounts was actually stolen directly from the First Baptist Church Senior Citizen Building Fund. I built a comprehensive digital timeline showing exactly how Yvonne funneled the embezzled community donations through Vance fake vendor accounts directly into Andre's operational budget. Then I moved on to his personal liabilities. The scale of his reckless, arrogant spending was genuinely staggering. He had leveraged multiple high-interest credit lines to fund luxury vacations to Dubai, custom-tailored suits, and the $80,000 engagement ring he bought for Caroline. And then I found the holy grail of his financial destruction. I pulled the exact federal loan documents for the $2 million he had secured in my name. I stared at the glowing screen, tracing the perfect, flawless forgery of my signature. I downloaded the origination files, the internal routing logs from the digital application, and the account numbers, proving the funds went straight into his personal offshore account. I compiled every single document, every wire transfer, every forged signature into a massive bulletproof digital portfolio. It was an airtight criminal case completely ready for the federal authorities. But Arthur Kensington was not just looking for behavioral red flags and hidden debts. He was demanding a complete, exhaustive assessment of Andre's collateral. In the investment proposal, Andre had confidently guaranteed a physical asset against the Kensington family initial seed money. He had listed a piece of premium historic real estate to prove he had actual generational wealth backing his startup. I cross-referenced the property identification number from the prospectus with the city municipal database. When the address populated on my screen, the breath completely vanished from my lungs. The room started spinning and a cold sweat broke out across my forehead. It was the historic brownstone on Elm Street, Big Mama House. This was the warm, beautifully preserved home where I had spent every single weekend of my childhood. It was the place where my grandmother taught me how to read financial ledgers at her massive oak dining table. It was my sanctuary when my mother's constant criticism and obvious favoritism toward Andre became entirely unbearable. 5 years ago, Charles Vance had sat in a stuffy probate office and told me Big Mama left me absolutely nothing. He claimed she had signed the entire estate over to Andre right before she died, and now my brother was casually offering her beloved home as collateral for a fake tech venture. If his company defaulted, which was mathematically guaranteed, Arthur Kensington would seize Big Mama House and liquidate it instantly to recoup his losses. The sheer disrespect of it made my blood boil with a toxic, blinding rage. Andre was perfectly willing to gamble away the only piece of genuine history our family possessed just to impress a billionaire and maintain his fake social status. I knew Andre was legally registered as the owner of the brownstone, but my forensic instincts were screaming that something was fundamentally wrong. Big Mama had explicitly told me on multiple occasions that she was leaving that brownstone to me because I was the only one who truly appreciated its history and value. I immediately bypassed the basic tax records and hacked directly into the restricted county deed registry. I needed to see the exact transfer of title document from 5 years ago. I pulled up the digitized scan of the original paper deed. My eyes scanned past the standard legal jargon, the property descriptions, and the basic transfer clauses. I landed directly on the notary seal and the witness signatures at the bottom of the page. I zoomed in on the high-resolution image, feeling a sudden violent chill wash over my entire body. My heart pounded against my ribs as I stared at the ink strokes on the screen. There was a glaring, impossible anomaly staring right back at me. The date stamped in thick black ink next to my grandmother's signature was May 14th. Big Mama had passed away on the morning of May 11th. Charles Vance, for all his expensive tailored suits and arrogant legal posturing, had made a sloppy, catastrophic error. He had notarized the signature of a dead woman. My chest tightened so violently I had to grip the edges of my dual monitors just to stay upright in my chair. This was not just a discrepancy or a clerical oversight. This was a severe felony. But a digitized scan on a county website was not enough to trigger a federal indictment or halt a multi-million-dollar corporate investment. I needed the physical paper trail. At exactly 8 o'clock the next morning, I limped through the heavy revolving glass doors of the county records building. The security guard glanced at my rigid medical brace, but I offered no explanation, keeping my expression entirely blank. I approached the restricted access counter and flashed my state-issued forensic auditor badge at the senior clerk behind the thick plexiglass window. I requested the complete sealed probate file for the estate of Martha Washington Williams. The clerk raised a skeptical eyebrow at the highly restricted request, but my credentials gave me unfettered access to municipal financial records. 10 tense minutes later, she returned and slid a thick, dusty manila envelope through the security slot. I carried the heavy file to a quiet viewing desk in the dimly lit corner of the archives room. The smell of aged paper and stale ink hit my nose as I carefully untied the frayed string closure. I bypassed the standard municipal tax forms and the property assessment documents, going straight for the original last will and testament. My hands shook slightly as I unfolded the heavy parchment. There it was. Not the heavily redacted summary Charles Vance had aggressively shoved across a polished conference table 5 years ago. This was the authentic, unedited document registered securely with the state long before Vance ever got his greedy hands on my family. I read the third paragraph and felt all the air completely leave my lungs. Big Mama had left the historic brownstone on Elm Street entirely to me. The legal language was absolute and undeniable. She explicitly stated that the property was to be placed in a protective trust in my name alone, ensuring I would always have a permanent home and a solid financial foundation to build my life upon. There was absolutely no mention of Andre in the property transfer. There was no mention of Yvonne. My grandmother had known exactly who they were, and she had taken deliberate, ironclad legal steps to protect me from their ravenous greed. The memory of the day after the funeral came rushing back with sickening clarity. The sweet, suffocating smell of wilting lilies had still hung heavily in the air of the brownstone living room. I had been an 18-year-old girl, shattered by profound grief, crying until my eyes were painfully swollen. My mother had stood over me, her posture rigid, and her face completely devoid of sympathy. She looked down at me and coldly stated that Big Mama had left me absolutely nothing, because I had disrespected the family by choosing to study accounting instead of staying home to support my brother. Yvonne had weaponized my deepest sorrow to strip away my entire inheritance. She had stood right next to Charles Vance as he smoothly presented a heavily forged quitclaim deed, claiming Big Mama had changed her mind and signed the house over to Andre in her final hours. They had looked a devastated teenager in the eye and lied without a single ounce of hesitation or remorse. They did not just steal a piece of premium real estate. They stole the final loving gesture my grandmother had carefully arranged for me. They stole my sanctuary to fund Andre's pathetic illusion of grandeur and Yvonne's social climbing obsession. The profound sense of heartbreak quickly hardened into something entirely different. The sorrow evaporated, leaving behind a cold, calculating fury that sharpened my focus to a razor edge. I was no longer an easily manipulated, grieving teenager. I was a senior financial investigator holding irrefutable proof of massive real estate fraud. I pulled a pair of latex gloves from my bag and carefully placed the original forged deed under the high-resolution portable scanner I had brought with me. I captured every single fiber of the paper, every fraudulent pen stroke, and that impossible notarized date. I requested certified stamped copies of the authentic will and the forged quitclaim deed from the head clerk. I paid the processing fee in cash and walked out of the building with the ultimate financial weapons safely tucked into my briefcase. By the time I returned to my apartment, my mind was working at lightning speed. Andre was not just sitting on a stolen house. He was actively using that stolen property as collateral to secure millions of dollars in seed money from the Kensington family. He was preparing to receive a massive wire transfer across state lines based entirely on fraudulent assets. That elevated this from a local probate dispute to a massive interstate financial crime. I sat down at my workstation and opened a secure encrypted portal directly to the Regional Federal Bureau of Investigation White-Collar Crime Division. I began compiling the final dossier. I attached the certified copy of the real will proving my rightful ownership. I attached the forged quitclaim deed, highlighting the impossible notary date with a detailed forensic analysis of the signature discrepancies. Then I attached Andre's signed investment proposal for Arthur Kensington, proving he was currently attempting to collateralize a stolen asset to secure interstate funds. I explicitly flagged the submission as an active ongoing wire fraud scheme involving a prominent local law firm. With one final steady keystroke, I filed the formal title dispute directly to the federal authorities, locking Andre into a trap he could never buy his way out of. The adrenaline of submitting the federal title dispute faded entirely the moment I lay back on the sterile vinyl table at the physical therapy clinic the very next morning. The cold, clinical lighting above me felt harsh and unforgiving. My physical therapist was a relentless professional who pushed me beyond my limits every single session. He placed his hands firmly on my ankle and my thigh, preparing to force the shattered joint to bend. I gripped the metal edges of the padded table until my knuckles turned completely white. The first push sent a shockwave of pure, blinding agony straight up my leg and into my spine. A raw, guttural scream tore from my throat, echoing off the bare walls of the small examination room. My vision actually went dark at the edges as the stiff, damaged tissue and healing bone violently resisted the movement. Sweat poured down my face, stinging my eyes and soaking the collar of my shirt. Every agonizing degree of flexion was a brutal physical reminder of exactly what my family had done to me. They had crushed my leg to silence me, and the pain radiating through my nervous system was entirely their fault. The therapist gave me a merciful 3-minute break to catch my breath and lower my skyrocketing heart rate. I lay flat on my back, gasping for air and staring blindly at the ceiling tiles. My phone vibrated intensely against the plastic medical tray sitting next to my head. I reached over with trembling, exhausted fingers and swiped the screen open. It was a barrage of text messages from Andre. The screen filled with high-resolution images of him standing in front of a tall mirror in an exclusive downtown boutique. He was wearing a bespoke charcoal gray Italian silk suit. The tailoring was absolutely flawless, hugging his shoulders and giving him the exact silhouette of the billionaire tech founder he was desperately pretending to be. The fabric alone likely cost more than my entire deductible for this grueling physical therapy. A second image showed him adjusting a massive diamond-encrusted cufflink with a smug, arrogant smile playing on his lips. Then the text messages began bubbling up beneath the photos. The words were cruel and deliberately calculated to strike at my current physical vulnerability. "Stay out of the wedding photos," Cripple the first message read. A second text chimed in immediately after. "Caroline Mother wants the family portraits to look aesthetically perfect. Do not ruin the aesthetic with those ugly metal crutches. Stand in the back row or just stay hidden in the corner where you belong." I stared at the glowing screen, my chest heaving heavily from the physical exertion of the therapy session. He was actively trying to humiliate me. He was parading his stolen luxury in my face while simultaneously mocking the physical brokenness he helped cause. But instead of the familiar wave of crushing insecurity, I just felt a deep, chilling sense of absolute calm. Let him buy his silk suits. Let him adjust his diamond cufflinks and gloat over his manufactured superiority. He was simply dressing up for his own financial funeral. The grueling therapy session eventually ended, leaving me physically drained and heavily reliant on the very crutches Andre had just mocked. I hobbled out to the clinic parking lot, each step sending a dull, heavy throb radiating from my knee up to my hip. Once I was safely secured in the driver's seat of my sedan, I leaned back and closed my eyes, letting the quiet isolation of the car soothe my frayed nerves. Before I could even start the engine, my phone chimed with a highly encrypted secure message notification. It was an alert from Renee. The message text was short and urgent. "Listen to this audio file right now." He thought he hung up his phone after calling to scream at me about signing the backdated divorce papers. He accidentally left a voicemail. I quickly routed the audio file through my car audio system and cranked up the volume. I pressed play and held my breath. The recording started with a wash of heavy background noise. There was the clinking of expensive crystal glasses, the low thumping bass of club music, and the unmistakable chaotic sound of an exclusive VIP lounge. Then Andre's voice cut through the background static. His words were slightly slurred, heavy with alcohol, and dripping with an unhinged level of arrogance. He was clearly talking to his best man, Marcus, bragging loudly over the club music. "Bro, you have absolutely no idea," Andre laughed, his voice echoing through my car speakers. "Once the Kensington wire transfer hits my offshore account next week, I am completely gone. The private jet is already on standby at the regional airport. I have a luxury penthouse lined up in Dubai, waiting for my arrival. There are no extradition treaties over there and zero corporate taxes. It is just going to be pure, uninterrupted luxury." I heard Marcus ask a muffled question in the background, something about the church audit and what would happen to the rest of the family once the company vanished. Andre laughed even harder, a dark, soulless sound that made my skin crawl. My mother Andre scoffed, his tone filled with absolute disdain. "Oh, she will be fine. Or she will go to federal prison. I really do not care either way. She left her fingerprints all over that church building fund. She moved the money herself. I made absolutely sure my name is nowhere on the First Baptist Bank transfer logs. Charles Vance set the corporate shell structure up perfectly to shield me. When the feds finally come knocking looking for the missing senior citizen money, Yvonne takes the absolute full impact of the blast. She was useful for securing the initial startup capital, but she is a massive liability now. I am not letting some pathetic small-town embezzlement charge slow my life down. She can rot in a federal cell for the next 20 years while I am drinking vintage champagne in the Emirates. The voicemail clicked and went dead, leaving my car in total silence. I sat frozen, gripping the leather steering wheel as the sheer magnitude of his betrayal washed over me. Andre was not just a fraud or a greedy opportunist. He was a complete sociopath. He was perfectly willing to throw his own mother to the federal wolves just to ensure his own clean getaway. He had planned this escape route from the very beginning, explicitly designing the financial structure to make Yvonne the sole criminal scapegoat. And the most brilliant, agonizing part of this entire revelation was that Yvonne had absolutely no idea. She thought she was building a glorious empire for her beloved golden child, completely blind to the terrifying reality that she was actively constructing her own prison cell. I sat in the sterile, windowless conference room of the Regional Federal Bureau of Investigation field office, feeling an odd sense of profound tranquility. The heavy metal door was closed, sealing me inside with Special Agent Miller and his seasoned partner. They were veteran white-collar crime investigators, who initially looked at me with a mild, bureaucratic skepticism when I first limped into their office on my heavy aluminum crutches. That typical agency skepticism evaporated into thin air the exact moment I slid my encrypted flash drive across the battered table and began displaying the raw evidence on their wall-mounted projector screen. I walked them through the digital labyrinth with the cold, detached precision of a senior forensic accountant. I showed them the exact routing numbers connecting the First Baptist Church Senior Citizen Building Fund directly to Charles Vance and his fake corporate shell accounts. I laid out the fabricated prospectus Andre had confidently submitted to the Kensington family, highlighting the entirely fraudulent revenue streams and the massive hidden liabilities. The two agents leaned forward in their chairs, their eyes narrowing as the sheer scale of the deception became undeniable. But the definitive turning point of the meeting occurred when I played the intercepted audio recording Renee had forwarded to me. Andre's slurred, arrogant voice echoed harshly off the concrete walls, bragging loudly over the thumping club music about his luxury penthouse in Dubai, the private jet waiting on standby, and his calculated plan to flee the country the second the Kensington wire transfer cleared. He explicitly boasted about leaving our mother behind to take the absolute full impact of the federal embezzlement charges. Agent Miller's posture instantly shifted from relaxed observation to rigid professional urgency. The explicit mention of an active flight risk involving millions of dollars in international wire transfers immediately elevated the situation from a pending financial investigation to an imminent tactical operation. I handed over the certified copy of the forged quitclaim deed for Big Mama House, proving without a shadow of a doubt that the collateral Andre was using to secure the Kensington investment was entirely stolen property. I explained that the multi-million-dollar wire transfer was scheduled to clear on the morning of the wedding. If they wanted to catch Andre dead to rights before he boarded that plane to the Emirates, they needed to strike while his guard was completely down and he was surrounded by witnesses. Agent Miller looked at the undeniable mountain of evidence and nodded in absolute agreement. The strike was officially authorized and coordinated for the night of the rehearsal dinner at the Kensington Country Club. I returned to my quiet apartment with my heart pounding a steady, powerful rhythm against my ribs. The trap was meticulously set, and the federal authorities were actively mobilizing their field agents. As I began to prepare for the evening, my phone buzzed sharply against the kitchen counter. I glanced down to see a rapid succession of text messages illuminating the screen from Yvonne. I opened the thread and read the incredibly strict, demeaning instructions she was issuing for the night. "You will sit at the vendor table near the kitchen," the first message demanded. "I do not want you anywhere near the main dining room." A second text immediately followed. "Do not speak to Caroline parents under any circumstances. You do not have the social grace for people of their caliber, and I will not let you embarrass us tonight. Do not mention your accounting job. If you have to eat, do it quickly and stay out of sight. You are only there because Caroline insisted on having immediate family present for the formal photographs." The sheer audacity of her demands was breathtaking. She was attempting to relegate me to the shadows, treating me like an undesirable servant in the very family she was actively destroying. She genuinely believed she had successfully broken my spirit and forced me into complete submission. She thought her empty threats regarding the fraudulent loan had paralyzed me with fear. I did not reply to her messages. I did not need to justify my existence or argue about seating arrangements with a woman who was hours away from wearing federal handcuffs. Let her enjoy her final fleeting moments of manufactured superiority. Let her bask in the illusion that she was pulling the strings of a grand dynasty. I turned away from the phone and walked into my home office. Sitting in the exact center of my desk was the final piece of the puzzle. It was a thick premium red binder stamped with the official gold foil seal of my forensic accounting firm. Inside was the complete unvarnished due diligence risk assessment Arthur Kensington had personally contracted my agency to perform. Every single page was a devastating indictment of Andre Fake Empire. It contained the absolute proof of the hollow shell companies, the staggering credit card debts, the fraudulent church transfers, and the forged deed to my grandmother historic brownstone. It was a bulletproof financial autopsy perfectly designed to protect the Kensington fortune and entirely obliterate my brother world. I ran my fingers over the smooth red cover, feeling the immense weight of the truth contained within its pages. I left the binder on the desk and moved to my bedroom closet, completely ignoring the conservative, shapeless dress my mother had explicitly ordered me to wear. Instead, I pulled out my absolute finest custom-tailored charcoal suit. The fabric was sharp and structured, designed specifically to project absolute professional authority. I slipped into the crisp white shirt and fastened the tailored blazer, letting the clean lines of the suit drape perfectly over my frame. I carefully adjusted the rigid medical brace on my leg, ensuring it was entirely visible and unhidden. I was no longer ashamed of the physical damage they had inflicted upon me. The brace was a badge of my survival. I grabbed my heavy metal crutches, feeling the cool, solid aluminum grounding my hands. I slung the thick strap of my leather briefcase over my shoulder, securing the red due diligence folder safely inside. I took one last look in the hallway mirror. The frightened, exhausted girl, who had sobbed on the phone to her mother, was completely gone. The woman staring back at me was a cold, calculating professional, armed with the truth and fully backed by the federal government. I adjusted my grip on the crutches and walked out the door, heading straight for the Kensington Country Club. The clinking of heavy sterling silver against fine porcelain faded into a low, elegant hum as I took my seat at the head table, directly to the right of Arthur Kensington. The sheer panic radiating from my mother and brother was palpable. Yvonne was staring at me from a few seats down, her face drained of all color, her manicured hands gripping her linen napkin so tightly, her knuckles were stark white. She had spent her entire evening trying to physically shove me into the shadows, treating me like an embarrassing stain on her grand societal debut. Instead, the billionaire patriarch of the Kensington family was currently pouring me a glass of sparkling water and asking insightful, probing questions about my forensic methodologies. Andre was sitting rigidly next to his glowing fiancée Caroline. He was wearing the exact same bespoke charcoal gray Italian silk suit he had maliciously texted me photos of just 24 hours ago. But the smug, arrogant smirk from his selfies had completely vanished. A single heavy bead of sweat traced a slow path down his temple, catching the warm light of the crystal chandeliers overhead. He was cornered, and he knew it. He was sitting across from the man he was actively trying to defraud, and the sister who held the absolute proof of his crimes. He desperately needed to regain control of the narrative before I could dismantle his entire manufactured reality. He abruptly stood up, pushing his heavy mahogany chair back with a loud scrape that echoed across the ballroom. He picked up his champagne flute and tapped a silver spoon against the delicate rim. The sharp, ringing sound instantly silenced the room. Hundreds of wealthy elite guests turned their attention to the handsome, charismatic groom standing at the center of the head table. Andre cleared his throat, pasting on a flawless, deeply rehearsed smile. He looked down at Caroline with manufactured adoration before letting his gaze sweep across the opulent room. "Thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate our future." Andre began, his voice rich and resonating with absolute fake sincerity. "Family is the foundation of everything we build. It is the invisible force that holds us up when we cannot stand on our own." He paused, letting the words hang in the air before slowly turning his gaze directly toward me. "And speaking of standing, I want to take a special moment to acknowledge my younger sister Tessa. A collective murmur rippled through the elegant crowd as hundreds of eyes shifted toward my rigid medical brace and the heavy aluminum crutches leaning against my chair. Andre let out a soft, perfectly calibrated sigh of sorrow. He placed a hand over his heart, playing the role of the deeply concerned, protective older brother to absolute perfection. As many of you know, Tessa has always struggled. Andre continued, his voice dropping to a theatrical whisper of manufactured pity. She has always been a bit troubled, a bit clumsy navigating through life. Just recently, she suffered a tragic accident falling down a flight of concrete stairs. It has been a heartbreaking ordeal for our family to watch her physical and emotional struggles. But that is what family is for. He raised his champagne flute higher, locking his eyes onto mine with a cold, dead stare that completely contradicted his warm tone. Despite her failures, despite the endless complications she brings to our doorstep, I have always carried my sister. I will always carry her. Because no matter how heavy the burden, a true leader never abandons his blood. The performance was masterfully sickening. He was actively using the catastrophic physical injuries he was responsible for to paint himself as a benevolent, merciful savior. He was gaslighting me in front of an audience of billionaires, framing my presence at the head table not as a professional triumph, but as an act of his own boundless charity. A wave of warm applause washed over the ballroom. Caroline looked up at him with tears of absolute adoration shining in her eyes. Yvonne visibly relaxed in her chair, a smug, victorious smile finally returning to her lips. They genuinely thought he had done it. They thought he had successfully neutralized me by wrapping my trauma in a neat, tragic little bow for public consumption. I sat perfectly still, letting the wave of elite applause wash over me. The old Tessa, the scared, isolated girl who desperately craved her family approval, would have withered under that spotlight. She would have lowered her head in shame and allowed them to dictate her reality. But the woman sitting next to Arthur Kensington felt absolutely nothing but a chilling clinical resolve. I looked at the heavy red due diligence folder resting inside my open leather briefcase at my feet. I reached down and gripped the handles of my aluminum crutches. I planted the rubber tips firmly against the polished hardwood floor and pushed myself upward. Searing pain immediately shot through my shattered knee, but I did not flinch. I did not let a single ounce of agony show on my face. I pulled my shoulders back, standing as tall and as impossibly straight as my broken body would allow. The applause awkwardly died down as I began to move. The only sound in the massive ballroom was the rhythmic, heavy thud of my metal crutches hitting the floorboards as I slowly made my way around the back of the head table. Andre's smile faltered as I approached him. His eyes darted nervously toward the exit doors, but there was nowhere for him to run. I stopped directly beside him, the height of my crutches putting me perfectly at his eye level. I did not ask for permission. I reached out and firmly took the microphone straight out of his sweating hand. His fingers twitched as if to pull it back, but my grip was absolute. I turned to face the sea of confused, wealthy guests, and then I looked directly down at Arthur Kensington, who was watching me with intense, unblinking focus. "That was a beautiful speech," I said, my voice projecting crisp and clear through the ballroom speakers. "But let us talk about what you actually carry, Andre." I reached into my tailored jacket with my free hand and pulled out the thick premium red binder stamped with the gold foil seal of my forensic accounting firm. I did not hand it to my brother. I leaned heavily on my right crutch, reached across the white linen tablecloth, and slid the massive due diligence folder directly in front of Mr. Kensington. It landed next to his crystal wine glass with a heavy, definitive thud. Arthur Kensington did not immediately touch the red binder. He sat perfectly still, staring at the gold foil seal of my forensic accounting firm before slowly lifting his piercing gaze to meet my eyes. He was a billionaire patriarch who had survived decades of ruthless corporate warfare, and he recognized a fatal strike when he saw one. The entire ballroom held its collective breath as his weathered hand finally reached out and flipped open the heavy cover. I had placed the executive summary right on top. It was printed in stark, uncompromising black ink, detailing every single fraudulent transaction and fabricated metric Andre had used to construct his imaginary empire. As Kensington's eyes scanned the first page, the temperature in the opulent room seemed to instantly plummet. Andre lunged forward across the white linen tablecloth, desperately trying to snatch the binder away, but Kensington simply raised one single commanding finger. Andre froze instantly, his hand hovering mid-air, his face flushing a deep, sickening shade of purple. I brought the microphone back to my lips. My voice echoed loudly off the crystal chandeliers and the vaulted ceilings, cutting through the horrified silence with absolute surgical precision. "My brother is not a tech CEO," I announced, my words ringing out clear and undeniable. "He has absolutely zero revenue. His entire company is a hollow shell built on fabricated user metrics and rented server space." The silence in the room was so profound, I could hear the faint clinking of silverware from the kitchen's swinging doors. I turned my head slightly to look directly at Caroline, who was staring at her fiancé with wide, terrified eyes. I looked back at Kensington and delivered the next blow. "The collateral he offered you, Mr. Kensington, to secure your massive seed investment is a forged deed to my grandmother, historic brownstone." He stood next to a corrupt attorney and proudly notarized the signature of a dead woman to steal my inheritance and use it to defraud your family. A loud collective gasp rippled through the hundreds of wealthy elite guests. Kensington's jaw clenched tightly as he flipped to the second page of the dossier where I had attached the high-resolution forensic scans of the forged signatures. Andre was physically shaking now, his bespoke charcoal gray Italian silk suit suddenly looking like a cheap costume. He opened his mouth to speak, but only a pathetic stuttering sound came out. I did not give him a single second to recover. I leaned into the microphone and delivered the killing strike. "And that $2 million debt he brushed off as a temporary cash flow issue during your negotiations?" I continued, my voice rising in power. "It is completely fraudulent. It is money systematically siphoned directly from the First Baptist Church Senior Citizen Building Fund. He stole from the elderly to buy his private jet memberships and tailored suits." The ballroom erupted into a chaotic symphony of shocked murmurs and outraged whispers. Caroline dropped her face into her hands, sobbing uncontrollably as the beautiful illusion of her perfect wedding shattered into a million jagged pieces. But Yvonne could not let this happen. Her entire social climbing existence was disintegrating right before her eyes. She leaped up from her chair, knocking over a crystal wine glass that shattered violently against the hardwood floor. Her carefully maintained high society facade crumbled completely, revealing the desperate, vicious woman underneath. She screamed at the absolute top of her lungs, pointing a trembling, manicured finger directly at my face. "She is lying!" Yvonne shrieked, her voice cracking with pure, unhinged hysteria. "She is completely off her psych meds. Someone remove her right now." Yvonne frantically signaled for the country club security guards hovering near the exits. She was actively weaponizing mental health, desperately trying to gaslight a room full of billionaires into believing I was simply a delusional, jealous sister. "Look at her hobbling around like a beggar," Yvonne hissed loudly, her face contorted with rage. "She has been obsessed with ruining her brother ever since she had a mental breakdown after our mother died. She is sick, and she fabricated all of these ridiculous documents to ruin this beautiful night. Get this crazy girl out of here before she hurts someone." Two large security guards in dark suits immediately stepped forward, moving rapidly toward the head table to grab my arms and drag me away. I did not back down, and I did not flinch. I planted my crutches firmly against the floorboards and stared my mother down. Before the guards could even reach me, Arthur Kensington slammed his heavy hand flat against the table. The sharp crack echoed like a gunshot, instantly halting the security guards in their tracks. "Stop right there!" Kensington ordered, his voice radiating absolute authority. He picked up the certified bank transfer logs I had included in the due diligence folder. "These are authenticated federal bank records," he stated coldly, staring directly at Yvonne. "These are stamped municipal tax forms and verified digital routing numbers. This is not the work of a delusional mind. This is the work of a master forensic auditor." Andre was sweating bullets, literally dripping perspiration onto his expensive silk collar. He tried to play it off frantically, wiping his forehead with a linen napkin. "Arthur, please, you have to listen to me," Andre pleaded, his voice dripping with desperation. "My sister is just confused. She is angry because I tried to help her, and she misunderstood the financial restructuring. It is all a terrible misunderstanding. I can explain everything in your office tomorrow morning. We can sort this out quietly like gentlemen." He was still desperately trying to sell the con, still hoping his manufactured charisma could buy him one more night to execute his escape plan to Dubai. He reached out to take Caroline's hand, but she violently recoiled, sliding her chair away from him in pure disgust. Before Andre could even attempt to formulate another pathetic lie, a massive sound interrupted the chaos. The heavy, solid oak doors at the very back of the country club ballroom swung open with a dramatic, resounding crash. Every single head in the opulent room whipped around to see what was happening. I watched from the head table as Renee confidently walked through the doorway. She was wearing a stunning, vibrant red dress that commanded absolute total attention. She looked entirely flawless and terrifyingly confident as she stepped into the room. The heavy, solid oak doors of the country club ballroom slammed shut behind her, the resounding boom echoing like a judge gavel, rendering a final verdict. Renee stood at the entrance for a brief moment, letting the sheer visual impact of her presence command the massive room. She was wearing a stunning, vibrant red dress that draped perfectly over her frame, a stark, bold contrast to the muted pastel evening gowns and conservative tuxedos of the Kensington guests. She looked entirely flawless, radiating a terrifyingly calm confidence as she began to walk down the center aisle. The rhythmic clicking of her heels against the polished hardwood floor cut through the absolute dead silence of the ballroom. It sounded like the ticking of a countdown clock, measuring the final seconds of my brother manufactured life. Every single eye in the opulent room tracked her movements. I watched Andre's face turn the color of wet cement. The remaining traces of his arrogant, fake billionaire persona melted away instantly, replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. He stumbled backward, bumping awkwardly into his heavy mahogany chair, his hands shaking so violently he knocked over a crystal water pitcher. The ice water spilled across the white linen tablecloth, dripping onto his lap, but he did not even seem to notice. He knew exactly who she was, and he knew exactly what her unexpected arrival meant. Yvonne was staring in absolute bewilderment, having no idea who this beautiful, fierce, uninvited woman was, or why she was striding directly toward our table with such lethal intent. My mother's mouth opened and closed silently like a fish gasping for air, her social climbing brain completely short-circuiting under the pressure of the unfolding disaster. Renee did not even spare a single glance for my brother. She completely ignored his pathetic stammering and bypassed his chair entirely. She walked straight up to Caroline, who was still sitting frozen in her seat, tears actively streaming down her pale face from the financial revelations I had just exposed. Renee stopped right in front of the terrified bride to be looking down at her with a mixture of pity and righteous vindication. She reached into her sleek black designer clutch and pulled out a thick folded piece of heavy cardstock stamped with a raised government seal. With a swift, aggressive motion, Renee slammed the official active marriage certificate right onto Caroline's plate directly next to her untouched filet mignon. The heavy paper soaked up a dark drop of rich wine sauce. "Hi, Caroline," Renee said, her voice remarkably steady, projecting clearly into the dead silence of the ballroom. "I am Renee. I am the current and entirely legal Mrs. Andre." A loud collective gasp sucked all the oxygen out of the massive room. Hundreds of elite guests, wealthy investors, and country club socialites began whispering frantically to one another, the scandal of the decade playing out right before their eyes. Caroline let out a choked, horrified sob, staring down at the state-certified government document, as if it were a highly venomous snake ready to strike. Andre let out a desperate, high-pitched whining sound, trying to lunge forward to grab the certificate, but Arthur Kensington slammed his heavy weathered hand down on the paper, pinning it flat to the table before my brother could snatch it away. The billionaire patriarch glared at Andre with a look of pure lethal disgust. Renee was not finished. She was not going to let him hide behind a single remaining lie. She reached back into her clutch and pulled out a thick, stapled stack of highlighted bank statements, dropping them directly on top of the marriage certificate. That massive 3-carat flawless diamond ring you are currently wearing on your left hand? Renee continued, her voice rising with righteous, calculated anger carrying across the entire room. He did not buy that with his vast tech fortune. He did not buy it with his imaginary offshore accounts. He bought it by completely emptying my public school teacher retirement fund last month. He drained my life savings to finance his fake bachelor lifestyle and proposed to you while he was still coming home to my apartment and sleeping in my bed every single night. Caroline completely broke down. The sheer magnitude of the betrayal hit her like a physical blow. She ripped the heavy diamond ring off her finger as if the metal was burning her skin and hurled it forcefully across the table. It bounced off a towering crystal centerpiece and clattered sharply onto the floor, rolling away into the shadows. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing hysterically, as her mother rushed over from an adjacent table to pull her away from the horrific scene. I stood leaning heavily on my aluminum crutches, feeling a profound sense of absolute poetic justice wash over me. I watched my mother frantically waving her arms, her mouth moving, but her words entirely drowned out by the escalating uproar. She had spent my entire life trying to bury me in the shadows, to protect the glowing illusion of her perfect son. Now that illusion was being incinerated under the harsh, bright lights of reality. The entire Kensington family erupted into absolute chaotic outrage. Arthur Kensington stood up to his full imposing height, his face dark with lethal billionaire fury, pointing a trembling finger at Andre. Caroline, 2 older brothers, surged forward from the front row tables, shouting loud, aggressive obscenities and threatening to physically tear my brother apart. Yvonne was shrieking helplessly, completely unable to process the staggering magnitude of the deception her beloved golden child had orchestrated. Her perfect high society dynasty was collapsing into a humiliating public circus, and there was absolutely nothing she could do to stop it. Andre was completely trapped. His fraudulent corporate empire was gone. His desperate escape plan to Dubai was obliterated. His wealthy fiancée was sobbing in her mother's arms, and his legal wife was standing over him with the absolute undeniable proof of his financial and emotional depravity. He looked around the room, his eyes darting frantically like a cornered animal, realizing there were no more lies left to tell. The sheer crushing weight of his complete destruction caused something inside his mind to violently snap. A terrifying, unhinged, guttural scream tore from his throat, echoing brutally over the shouts of the angry guests. His eyes went completely wide and feral, shifting instantly from terrified panic to pure homicidal rage. He reached down and grabbed a heavy serrated steak knife from the table. His knuckles turned stark white around the polished silver handle. "You ruined everything!" he roared, his voice cracking with pure madness. He lunged directly across the table, thrusting the sharp blade straight toward Renee. But Arthur Kensington had not survived decades of ruthless corporate warfare without maintaining absolute top-tier security. Before the blade could even cross the white linen tablecloth, 2 massive men in dark suits materialized from the shadows of the room. Kensington Private Security Detail moved with terrifying speed and precision. One guard grabbed Andre's extended wrist, twisting it violently backward, until the steak knife clattered harmlessly onto the floorboards. The second guard hit my brother squarely in the chest, tackling him forcefully over the head table. Crystal wine glasses shattered into 1,000 pieces, and expensive china plates crashed to the ground as Andre was slammed brutally onto the hardwood floor. The guards pinned his arms tightly behind his back, driving their heavy knees directly into his spine, pressing his face hard against the spilled wine and broken glass, perfectly ruining his custom-tailored Italian silk suit. The agonizing sound of my brother whimpering against the hardwood floor cut through the absolute pandemonium echoing across the Kensington Country Club ballroom. Guests were scrambling backward, knocking over heavy mahogany chairs and dropping their crystal champagne flutes in a desperate bid to get away from the violence. Carolyn older brothers were still shouting furiously, demanding that Andre be locked away for what he had done to their sister. Arthur Kensington simply stood at the head table looking down at the pathetic, writhing mess of a man who had tried to steal his family fortune. But the true spectacle was not my brother pinned against the shattered china. It was my mother. Yvonne finally snapped out of her paralyzed state of shock. A raw, guttural scream erupted from her lungs, tearing through the elegant room as she lunged forward. She threw herself toward the head table, desperately trying to reach her precious golden child. She clawed at the broad shoulders of the private security guards, demanding they release her son, her perfectly styled hair falling wildly around her panicked face. The guards did not even flinch, simply stepping sideways and using their massive frames to physically block her path. Realizing she was completely powerless to save the crumbling illusion of her dynasty, Yvonne suddenly spun around. Her eyes locked directly onto me. The sheer level of venom burning in her gaze was staggering. All the manufactured high society grace she had spent decades cultivating evaporated in an instant, leaving behind nothing but pure, unhinged malice. She marched toward me, her expensive high heels crunching loudly over the broken glass scattered across the floor. "You evil, jealous witch!" Yvonne shrieked at the absolute top of her lungs, her voice cracking with pure fury. "You destroyed your own blood. You could not stand seeing your brother succeed while you were just a pathetic cripple. You planned this entire disaster just to ruin him." She stopped mere inches from my face, her chest heaving heavily as she pointed a trembling manicured finger directly at my chest. "I will make sure you pay for this," Yvonne screamed, spit flying from her lips. "I will ensure you are entirely shunned by every single person in our community. I will tell the entire church exactly what kind of monster you are. You will have absolutely nothing and no one. You are completely dead to me, Tessa. Dead to me." I stood my ground, leaning my weight comfortably against my heavy aluminum crutches. I did not flinch. I did not shed a single tear. The frightened daughter who used to internalize her mother's cruel words was completely gone. I looked at the frantic, desperate woman screaming in my face and felt nothing but a profound clinical detachment. She was threatening to isolate me from a community she was actively robbing blind. She was defending a sociopath who had fully planned to leave her holding the bag for federal embezzlement charges. It was pathetic, and it was exactly the opening I had been waiting for. "Are you quite finished?" I asked, my voice perfectly calm and projecting clearly through the lingering echoes of her hysterical screaming. "Because if you want to talk about destroying your own blood, we need to address exactly how you finance this little charade." I did not wait for her to formulate another toxic lie. I reached down into the deep side pocket of my leather briefcase resting on the floor. My fingers wrapped around the cool, smooth cylinder of a portable high-definition Bluetooth speaker. I pulled it out and set it firmly on the white linen tablecloth right next to the red due diligence folder I had given Arthur Kensington. I pulled my mobile phone from my jacket pocket, tapping the screen to bring up the specific audio file Renee had managed to extract from my mother's unsecured home computer network. Yvonne stopped screaming and stared at the small black speaker resting on the table. A sudden chilling wave of comprehension washed over her face. She recognized the device, and she recognized the cold, calculating look in my eyes. Her manicured hands began to tremble violently as the realization hit her. She had spent the entire evening treating me like a socially inept peasant, completely oblivious to the fact that I was a senior forensic auditor who left absolutely no stone unturned. "This is for the community you are so eager to turn against me," I announced, speaking loudly enough for the entire ballroom to hear. I pressed the play button on my phone and turned the speaker volume to maximum. The recording started with the unmistakable sound of a heavy desk drawer closing, followed by the clinking of a wine glass. Then Yvonne's own voice filled the silent ballroom. It was not the sweet, cultured tone she used for the country club elite. It was harsh, arrogant, and dripping with superiority. She was talking on the phone to her sister, boasting about the massive cash infusions she was funneling into Andre's fake business accounts. "Of course I moved the money," Yvonne recorded, voice bragged, echoing off the vaulted ceilings. Those First Baptist Church senior citizen building funds were just sitting there rotting in a low-yield municipal account. "I am the Treasury Secretary. I control the ledger." Andre needed a massive liquidity bridge to secure the Kensington investment, and I provided it. It is just a temporary loan. In the ballroom, my mother's face drained of all color, turning a sickly shade of chalky white. She backed away from the table, shaking her head in absolute denial, but the recorded audio kept playing, sealing her fate with every single word. "They will never even notice the transfers," Yvonne's voice continued, laughing, a dark, soulless laugh that made my stomach churn. "Those church elders are nothing but gullible old fools. They sign whatever papers I put in front of them without reading a single line. By the time they realize the senior center construction account is empty, Andre will have secured the billionaire capital. It is foolproof. We are finally stepping into the elite circle, and no one is going to stop us." The audio file clicked to an end, leaving the country club ballroom in a state of absolute dead, suffocating silence. The phrase, "gullible old fools," hung in the air like a toxic cloud. The wealthy guests, who had just applauded Andre's fake speech, were now staring at my mother with expressions of pure, unfiltered disgust. She had not just aided and abetted a massive corporate fraud. She had actively stolen millions of dollars from vulnerable elderly church members to finance her son's fake luxury lifestyle. She had manipulated the faith and trust of her own community to buy tailored suits and rent penthouse suites. Arthur Kensington looked up from the red binder, his jaw clenched so tightly a muscle twitched in his cheek. He looked at my mother, and then down at my brother, who was still pinned against the floor. "You are not just frauds," Kensington stated, his voice vibrating with absolute lethal contempt. "You are parasites." Yvonne's legs gave out completely. She collapsed onto the polished hardwood floor, her designer dress pooling around her in a pathetic heap. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably, but no one rushed forward to comfort her. The elegant society friends she had spent months desperately trying to impress simply turned their backs in disgust. She was utterly ruined, publicly humiliated, and stripped of every single illusion she had violently fought to protect. She was finally experiencing the exact same isolation and shame she had inflicted upon me for my entire life. I stood tall, leaning on my aluminum crutches, looking down at the two people who had gleefully destroyed my leg and my livelihood. They had thought they were untouchable predators feeding on the weak, but I had meticulously tracked their financial footprints and built a cage they could never escape. Before anyone else in the ballroom could speak or react, the distant piercing wail of police sirens pierced the quiet night air. The sharp rising and falling pitch grew rapidly louder, echoing off the manicured country club golf course. Red and blue emergency lights began to flash wildly through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the horrified faces of the guests. The wailing multiplied as dozens of federal law enforcement vehicles swarmed the main entrance, actively surrounding the entire building. Special Agent Miller had arrived right on schedule. The heavy solid oak doors of the country club ballroom were thrown violently open for the second time that night, but this time it was not a scorned wife making a dramatic entrance. It was a highly coordinated federal raid. Dozens of agents wearing dark navy windbreakers with stark yellow FBI lettering across the back flooded into the elegant space, moving with absolute tactical precision. Local police officers in full uniform marched alongside them, their heavy utility belts rattling, their radios squawking harsh static into the deathly quiet room. The visual clash was staggering. Highly trained federal law enforcement officers were storming a room filled with crystal chandeliers, white orchids, and billionaires in bespoke tuxedos. The wealthy elite guests who had just been applauding my brother's fake success now scrambled backward, pressing themselves against the silk wallpaper, desperate to get out of the way of the authorities. Special Agent Miller, a tall, uncompromising man with a shaved head and a gaze like crushed ice, walked directly down the center aisle. He did not look at the terrified socialites or the shattered crystal on the floor. He walked straight up to the head table where Arthur Kensington Private Security Detail was still pressing my brother, face into the hardwood floor. Miller gave a brief, sharp nod to the security guards. They immediately stepped back, hauling Andre upward by the collar of his ruined Italian silk suit. Andre's legs were trembling so violently he could barely support his own weight. His custom charcoal gray jacket was stained with red wine, his tie was completely askew, and his face was smeared with dirt and panic. Agent Miller grabbed my brother's arms and twisted them roughly behind his back. The sharp metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs ratcheting closed echoed loudly through the entire ballroom. Andre Wilson, Agent Miller, announced, his voice projecting with absolute clinical authority. "You are under arrest. You are being charged with multiple federal counts of wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and bigamy. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." As the federal agent continued reciting the Miranda rights, Andre's eyes darted around the room in absolute wild panic. The word bigamy hung in the air, causing a fresh wave of disgusted gasps from the Kensington family. Andre was completely out of options, out of lies, and out of time. But his delusional, narcissistic brain simply could not accept that the game was over. He looked past the federal agents and locked his desperate feral gaze onto his fiancée. Caroline was standing a few feet away, clutching her mother's arm, her expensive white silk engagement dress, looking like a cruel joke. "Baby, please!" Andre screamed, his voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched whine that made my skin crawl. "Baby, pay my bail. Talk to your father. Tell Arthur we can fix this. I can explain everything. It is just a massive misunderstanding. Just write the check and we can still get married. We can fix this." The entire ballroom watched in stunned fascination as Caroline slowly pulled away from her mother. She walked toward my brother, her expression devoid of any sadness or heartbreak. There were no more tears left on her face. She looked at the man she had almost married, and her eyes radiated nothing but pure, absolute disgust. During the initial chaos of Renee's arrival, Caroline had instinctively picked up the massive diamond ring from the floor, in a daze, clutching it tightly in her palm. But now she knew exactly what to do with it. She did not scream. She did not cry. She simply raised her hand and stared at the fraudulent diamond bought with stolen public school teacher retirement funds. She pulled the heavy ring out of her palm, displaying it for him to see. She then reached over and picked up a half-full crystal goblet of ice water from the table. Without saying a single word to my brother, she dropped the ring directly into the water. It sank to the bottom with a heavy, muffled clink, magnifying through the thick crystal glass. She turned her back on him completely and walked away, leaving him staring helplessly at the sunken diamond. Andre let out a muffled, wretched sob as two local police officers grabbed him by the biceps and began dragging him forcefully toward the ballroom exit. His expensive leather shoes dragged across the floor, his head hanging in total defeat. But the raid was not over. Special Agent Miller turned away from the departing spectacle of my brother and began walking deliberately toward my mother. Yvonne was still crumpled on the floor, her elegant designer evening gown bunched up around her knees. She was staring blankly at the space where her perfect golden son had just been hauled away in steel handcuffs. Her pristine high society facade was completely obliterated. Her expensive makeup was smeared across her cheeks, and her carefully styled hair hung in ragged strands around her face. The audio recording of her calling the church elders gullible old fools was still ringing fresh in the ears of every single person in the room. Two more FBI agents stepped up directly behind Special Agent Miller. They formed a tight, intimidating semicircle around my mother, looking down at her with absolute professional contempt. "Yvonne Wilson," Agent Miller stated, his voice cutting through her shock like a scalpel. "We have a federal warrant for your immediate arrest. You are being charged with grand larceny and the systemic embezzlement of $400,000 from the First Baptist Church Senior Citizen Building Fund. Please stand up and place your hands behind your back." The words hit my mother like a physical blow. The absolute reality of her situation finally breached the walls of her lifelong delusion. She was not going to be a billionaire mother-in-law. She was not going to rule the country club elite. She was not going to sip champagne on a private jet. She was going to federal prison. Yvonne let out a hollow, wretched gasp. Her arms gave out completely and she fell to her knees, slumping forward heavily onto her hands. She bowed her head toward the hardwood floor and began sobbing uncontrollably, her thin shoulders shaking with violent, racking heaves. The wailing sound of her absolute destruction echoed through the silent ballroom, a pathetic symphony of her own making. I stood tall, leaning on my aluminum crutches, looking down at the two people who had gleefully destroyed my life. They had spent decades treating me like an ugly, unwanted burden. They had stolen my grandmother's inheritance. They had laughed at my pain. They had thought they were untouchable predators feeding on the weak. But I had meticulously tracked their financial footprints and built a cage they could never escape. I did not feel an ounce of pity. I felt only the warm, sweet satisfaction of absolute justice. I watched as the federal agents hauled my mother up from the floor, snapping the cold steel handcuffs around her wrists. As they marched her away toward the flashing red and blue lights waiting outside, I took a deep, cleansing breath. The golden child and the toxic mother were finally gone and the scapegoat had won. The cold night air rushed into the stifling ballroom as the heavy oak doors were propped wide open by the tactical team. Yvonne was being hauled forward, her designer heels dragging across the expensive Persian rugs of the country club lobby. The flashing emergency lights from the armada of police vehicles outside painted the marble walls in harsh, alternating strokes of red and blue. I adjusted my grip on the ergonomic handles of my aluminum crutches and moved with deliberate, calculated purpose. I cut across the grand foyer, ignoring the shocked murmurs of the wealthy guests who were shrinking back against the walls. I intercepted the procession, stepping directly into the path of Special Agent Miller and the local lead detective, a grizzled man with sharp, observant eyes, who was currently marching my brother toward the exit. I planted my crutches firmly on the polished marble floor, refusing to move an inch. "Officer, there is one more charge," I stated, my voice echoing clearly off the high-vaulted ceilings of the lobby. I reached into the interior pocket of my tailored blazer and pulled out a small, sleek silver flash drive. I held it out between my index finger and thumb, catching the reflection of the tactical lights. The lead detective paused, his heavy hand still tightly gripping Andre's shoulder. He looked at the metallic drive and then back up at my face, noting the absolute serious conviction in my eyes. Andre violently flinched against the detective grip, the remaining color completely draining from his face, leaving him looking like a terrified ghost. He tried to pull back to shrink away from the tiny silver device, but the officer held him securely in place. Yvonne, who had been sobbing hysterically while being marched behind him, suddenly choked on her own breath. Her wide, panicked eyes locked onto the flash drive in my hand, and her entire body went completely rigid. "This contains unedited, high-definition security footage from the underground parking garage of my apartment building," I explained, my tone completely stripped of any sympathy or emotion. "It is time, stamped date, verified, and completely authenticated. It shows exactly how I ended up needing these crutches to walk." "Aggravated assault with a deadly weapon," I stated coldly, staring straight into my brother's wide, terrified eyes. "An accessory to assault for the woman standing right behind him." The lead detective's jaw tightened. He reached out and took the silver flash drive from my palm, slipping it carefully into a clear plastic evidence bag. The lobby had gone completely silent. Even the wealthy country club members, who had been whispering frantically, were now holding their breath, hanging on my every word. I made sure my voice carried so every single person in that building knew exactly what kind of violent predators they had been mingling with all evening. The footage clearly shows Andre waiting in the shadows behind a concrete pillar with a heavy steel tire iron. I continued forcing the words out, as the visceral memory of the agonizing pain fueled my righteous anger. "It shows him stepping out, as I walked to my car, and intentionally smashing the solid metal rod directly into my knee. He shattered the joint, completely fracturing the bone in 3 places, simply because I had found his hidden ledger and dared to question his fraudulent bank statements. He wanted to permanently cripple me to make sure I could not walk into a police station and expose his lies. A collective shudder of pure revulsion rippled through the gathered crowd. Arthur Kensington had stepped out of the ballroom doors and was standing at the edge of the foyer, his face an absolute mask of disgusted horror. "But the most damning part of the video is not my brother swinging the weapon," I said, shifting my gaze away from Andre and locking it dead onto my mother. "It is my mother standing 5 feet away watching him destroy my mobility and literally clapping her hands in approval." She smiled while I screamed on the concrete floor. Yvonne's legs buckled beneath her, but the 2 federal agents held her up roughly by her handcuffed wrists. She opened her mouth to deny it, to spin another desperate web of manipulative lies, but the words completely died in her throat. She looked at my face and saw absolutely no mercy. She looked at the clear plastic evidence bag in the detective hand and realized in that exact horrifying moment that there was absolutely no talking her way out of this. The financial crimes, the embezzlement, and the wire fraud would financially ruin them, but the premeditated physical assault caught on high-definition video changed everything. It meant her precious golden child was going to a maximum security prison for a very long time, and she was going to be right there in an adjacent cell for cheering him on. The detective gave me a grim, solemn nod and shoved Andre forward, pushing him violently through the heavy glass doors and out into the chaotic flashing lights of the parking lot. The federal agents marched Yvonne right behind him, her head hanging low in ultimate defeat. I followed them out into the crisp night air, the gravel of the driveway crunching loudly beneath the rubber tips of my crutches. Dozens of local police cruisers and black federal SUVs were angled aggressively across the manicured entrance of the country club. The red and blue lights washed over the perfectly pruned hedges, creating a chaotic, surreal crime scene. As the federal agents pulled open the heavy rear door of a police cruiser to shove my mother inside, I stepped up right beside the vehicle. "Wait," I said, stopping the agent for just one more second. I reached into my heavy leather briefcase one last time and pulled out a crisp, stiff legal envelope with a certified red wax seal. Yvonne looked up at me from the back seat of the police cruiser. Her face was heavily streaked with running mascara, and tears, her eyes begging for a mercy she had never once shown me during my entire life. I leaned down slightly, bracing my weight on my crutches, and tossed the thick envelope right onto her lap. It landed with a soft thud against her ruined designer gown. "By the way, Mom," I said, my voice dropping to a low, lethal whisper that only she could hear over the wailing sirens. "That is your 24-hour eviction notice. You forgot that the forged deed you used for collateral was flagged by the bank. I untangled the paperwork yesterday. Big Mama Historic Brownstone is legally mine." Exactly 1 week had passed since the flashing red and blue lights illuminated the country club parking lot and exposed the absolute truth to the world. The crisp morning air of the historic district felt remarkably clean as I stood looking out over the perfectly manicured front lawn of Big Mama Historic Brownstone. The transition from the bulky aluminum crutches to a sleek, polished ebony cane felt like shedding a heavy suit of armor. My knee was healing slowly, but more importantly, my spirit was entirely unbroken. The massive multi-million-dollar property was finally and legally mine. The bank had verified the high-resolution scans of the forged signatures and legally voided the fraudulent collateral, returning the deed squarely into my name, where my grandmother had always intended it to be. The front yard of the sprawling estate was currently serving a very different purpose. Instead of hosting elite garden parties for my mother high society friends, the lush green grass was completely covered in cheap, thin black plastic garbage bags. There were over 50 of them piled high in a massive, unceremonious heap. I had not bothered to fold anything. I had personally watched the hired moving crew sweep through the sprawling master suite and Andre lavishly decorated guest room, dumping every single item they found directly into the trash. High-end designer suits, imported silk ties, velvet smoking jackets, and expensive cashmere sweaters were stuffed haplessly into the black plastic, stretching it to the absolute breaking point. A few of the cheap bags had ripped open, spilling expensive Italian fabric and custom leather shoes onto the damp morning grass. It was the physical manifestation of their fraudulent lives reduced to literal garbage. A dull gray taxi pulled up to the curb, a stark, depressing contrast to the luxury European town cars that usually idled in front of the estate. The rear door opened and Yvonne stepped out. She had managed to post bail, but the horrific stress of the federal indictment and the freezing of her assets had visibly aged her 10 years in a single week. Her posture was stooped, her signature blonde hair lacked its usual perfect volume, and she wore a pair of oversized dark sunglasses to hide the toll of her incarceration. She paid the driver with crumpled cash and turned toward the house, stopping dead in her tracks on the sidewalk. Her jaw dropped open as she registered the massive mountain of black plastic bags completely burying the front lawn. For a split second, I saw sheer confusion cloud her face before the familiar toxic rage bubbled up to the surface. "What is the meaning of this?" Yvonne shrieked, her voice hoarse and raw as she marched up the stone pathway. She kicked violently at a torn bag, sending a cluster of Andre expensive designer watches scattering across the wet pavement. "You cannot do this to me, Tessa. I am your mother. You have absolutely no right to touch my things." The heavy, solid oak front door swung open, and I stepped out onto the wide, wraparound porch. Renee walked right beside me, holding a steaming mug of black coffee, looking utterly serene in a comfortable, oversized knit sweater. She had spent the last week helping me secure the property and untangle the massive financial mess my brother had left behind. We stood side by side, looking down at the furious, desperate woman screaming on the lawn. I planted my sleek cane firmly against the wooden floorboards, feeling the solid weight of the historic home supporting me. "You have absolutely no right to be on this property," I stated, my voice radiating a calm, unshakable authority that echoed clearly across the quiet neighborhood street. "I am the sole legal owner of this estate, and you are officially trespassing." Yvonne ripped off her sunglasses, her eyes wide with frantic indignation. "You are a monster!" she hissed, pointing a trembling, manicured finger at me. "You are putting your own mother out on the street. Where am I supposed to go? I have nothing left. The government froze all my accounts. My friends will not even return my phone calls. Andre is sitting in a federal holding cell waiting for his arraignment. You cannot just throw me out like a piece of common trash." I looked down at the sprawling pile of garbage bags, and then back up at the woman who had made my childhood a living nightmare. I let her words hang in the air, allowing the sheer aggressive hypocrisy of her statement to fully resonate. "You kicked me out of this very house with nothing but a frayed canvas backpack." When I was exactly 18 years old, I said, the memory of that cold, terrifying night fueling my resolve. "You stood on this exact same porch and watched me walk away into the freezing rain because I refused to lie to the insurance company about Andre crashing his sports car. You told me I was a useless burden and that I would never amount to anything. You changed the locks while I was still standing on the sidewalk crying. You gave me absolutely nothing, and I survived. I built a career and I built a life of my own without a single drop of your corrupted money." I gestured dismissively toward the massive pile of trash on the lawn with my free hand. "You can take your garbage bags and go." The absolute finality in my voice finally shattered the last remaining wall of Yvonne's aggressive pride. The sheer, terrifying reality of her complete destitution hit her with the force of a freight train. Her knees buckled beneath her, and she collapsed right there onto the damp grass, sinking into the pile of cheap plastic bags. The fierce, arrogant socialite vanished instantly, leaving behind a broken, terrified shell of a woman. She clasped her hands together in front of her chest, sobbing loudly as she looked up at me. "Please, Tessa," she begged, her voice cracking into a desperate, pathetic wail that echoed down the quiet street. "Please do not do this. We are family. You have to show some family loyalty. I am your mother. I gave birth to you. I have nowhere else to go. You have to help me. Please, just let me back inside. We can fix this. We can be a real family again." I stared down at the weeping woman kneeling among the ruined designer clothes and the shattered remnants of her fraudulent empire. I watched her tears fall onto the black plastic bags, and I did not feel an ounce of pity. "Family loyalty is earned," I said coldly, my voice cutting straight through her hysterical sobbing. "And you spent my entire life proving exactly who you are." I turned my back on her completely. Renee gave Yvonne one final look of pure, unadulterated disgust before turning and following me inside. I stepped across the threshold, pulling the heavy solid oak door shut behind me. The heavy deadbolt clicked into place, with a loud final resounding thud, locking her out forever. 6 months passed with the swift, relentless momentum of a falling gavel. The federal justice system did not care about exclusive country club memberships or carefully curated social media profiles. It cared about paper trails and wire transfers, and the mountain of irrefutable evidence I had handed over in that red due diligence folder. The subsequent trial was a massive media spectacle that entirely stripped the Wilson family name of its manufactured prestige. I sat in the polished wooden gallery of the federal courthouse, watching the final verdict come down with absolute clinical detachment. Andre was not wearing a custom-tailored Italian silk suit or flashing his signature arrogant smile. He was wearing an oversized, shapeless orange jumpsuit that swallowed his previously imposing frame. He stood before the federal judge, trembling just as violently as he had on the ballroom floor, his wrists bound in heavy steel chains. The courtroom gallery behind him was entirely empty. The wealthy socialites and fake investors he had spent years trying to impress had completely abandoned him. Arthur Kensington had personally testified against him, delivering the final crushing blow to his fraudulent empire. The judge did not mince words, citing his absolute lack of remorse and the predatory nature of his financial crimes before handing down a severe sentence of 12 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary. Andre collapsed back into his chair, burying his face in his manacled hands, his shoulders shaking with genuine terror. There were no cameras flashing for a high society wedding, just court sketch artists capturing the exact moment the fake billionaire became a federal inmate. His penthouse suites and imported sports cars were permanently replaced with a concrete cell and a metal toilet. The man who had swung a tire iron at my knee to protect his fragile ego was now locked away in a cage, completely stripped of his freedom and his fake identity. My mother did not fare much better in the unforgiving machinery of the justice system. Yvonne was absolutely terrified of serving hard time, and her expensive defense attorney strongly advised her to take a plea deal before the federal prosecutors could bring the accessory to assault charges to a grand jury. She tearfully accepted 5 years of heavily monitored probation, but the judge insisted on adding a highly specific and public condition for her financial crimes. She was ordered to pay back every single cent of the $400,000 she had embezzled from the First Baptist Church. To ensure she understood the gravity of her theft, she was mandated to perform thousands of hours of community service, working a minimum-wage custodial job at the exact same church she had robbed. The poetic justice of her punishment was absolute. The woman who used to host lavish garden parties and look down her nose at anyone wearing off-the-rack clothing was now spending her days scrubbing scuff marks off the gymnasium floor. She wore a shapeless gray uniform, pushing a heavy yellow mop bucket past the community members she used to manipulate and mock. The elders of the church, the ones she had arrogantly called gullible old fools on that audio recording, now watched her empty the trash cans in the sanctuary. They did not speak to her. They did not invite her to Sunday service or community potlucks. They simply stepped around her as she scrubbed the baseboards, her hands calloused and raw from the harsh industrial cleaning chemicals. At the end of her humiliating shifts, Yvonne did not return to a sprawling historic brownstone or a luxury high-rise. The bank had seized her remaining depleted accounts, leaving her with absolutely nothing to her name. She was forced to rent a tiny, cramped one-bedroom apartment in a decaying building on the industrial side of town. It was the exact kind of squalor she had mocked me for living in during my college years. Her living room window looked out over a loud, noisy highway. The wallpaper was stained with water damage, and the radiator clanked violently through the freezing nights. The designer wardrobe she had stuffed into garbage bags on my lawn had been sold to consignment shops just to make rent for her first month. She was completely isolated, eating cheap canned soup at a wobbly laminate table trapped in a prison of her own making, entirely shunned by the high society circles she had destroyed her own daughter to impress. While they rotted in the squalor of their own consequences, my life expanded into a brilliant, vibrant reality. The grueling physical therapy sessions and the agonizing hours of rebuilding my strength had finally paid off. 6 months of relentless dedication allowed my shattered bones to fuse and heal properly, restoring the mobility they had tried so violently to steal. The lingering shadows of trauma that used to haunt my quiet moments had completely evaporated, replaced by a profound, unshakable peace. I had reclaimed the legacy of my grandmother, protected a vulnerable community from financial ruin, and exorcised the toxic poison from my life forever. The warm afternoon sun reflected off the polished hood of a sleek midnight blue town car as it pulled smoothly up to the curb of the bustling downtown financial district. The driver stepped out and opened the heavy rear door. I shifted my weight and stepped out onto the pristine concrete sidewalk, taking a deep breath of the fresh city air. I reached back into the plush leather interior of the vehicle, resting my hand on the smooth ebony wood of my sleek walking cane. I looked at the mobility aid that had supported me through the darkest and most painful chapters of my life. I did not need it anymore. I let go of the handle, leaving the cane resting quietly on the back seat, and closed the car door. I stood perfectly straight, planting both feet firmly on the ground, testing my healed knee. It held my weight flawlessly, without a single twinge of pain. Renee was waiting for me near the entrance of the towering glass structure, her sharp, tailored suit cutting a striking silhouette against the bright, modern architecture. She smiled warmly as I walked toward her, my stride even and completely unassisted. We stood side by side looking up at the gleaming facade of the brand-new ultra-modern skyscraper. It was a beacon of transparent corporate success, standing tall in the heart of the business district. Mounted securely on the polished marble wall beside the grand glass entrance was a massive brushed steel plaque catching the afternoon light. It read, "Tessa and Renee, Financial Forensics." I looked at my name etched in solid metal, and a slow, genuine smile spread across my face. The terrified daughter who used to shrink away from the cruel insults of her mother was gone. The broken woman bleeding on the concrete floor of a parking garage was gone. The trauma was completely over. I walked confidently through the revolving glass doors, stepping into the bright, bustling lobby of my own company, knowing the empire was finally mine. The greatest lesson from this ordeal is that blood does not automatically make someone family. True family is built on mutual respect and unconditional support. You are never obligated to endure toxic behavior just because you share a last name with those who consistently hurt you. Walking away from a poisoned environment is an act of profound self-preservation and courage. You have the absolute right to set firm boundaries and fiercely protect your peace. Have you ever had to cut ties with toxic relatives to protect your sanity? Share your experiences in the comments below, and please subscribe for more empowering stories. Remember, your worth is never defined by those who are blind to it.